traveling around a lot. I think he might travel more than me.
Nomad Capitalist.
The Nomad Capitalist.
The Nomad Capitalist.
There are no rational arguments to support the ideas which created this country.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
This is the future of freedom and opportunity. This is the Nomad Capitalist Report.
26 days until passport to freedom in Cancun. Hello traders, my name is Andrew Henderson. This is the Nomad Capitalist Report. This is the radio show where we talk about offshore strategies for entrepreneurs and investors to grow and protect their wealth overseas, to go where you're treated best. And thank you for tuning in. Here we are together again, and but I'll tell you what, I had a margarita the other day. Had a few Mexican snacks, a little pork empanada. Excellent food. Getting ready for the Mexican cuisine. Getting ready for all the fun. 26 days from now, passport to freedom event.com. If you were not on board, we only have I think fewer than 20 tickets left. We've been growing so fast. I let all the marketing guys handle everything now. And I think that's about the number that they told me. So if you've been floating around Facebook, you've probably seen an ad suggesting that you better hurry if you want to come. All right, a lot to get to today. Last week we talked about Malaysia and the second residency visa available here. Coming up a little bit later in the show, I'm going to talk to one of the top immigration lawyers in China for a very unconventional discussion, not just about Chinese business and Chinese investment trends, which if you're an entrepreneur, you need to hear. But we're also going to be talking about how to get residency in China and answer the question, can a Westerner, can a foreigner become a Chinese citizen, and how do you do that? So that's coming up later with Gary Chutterow from lawandborder.com. One thing, speaking of Malaysia, that I've been getting a lot of requests to talk about lately, and I've been hearing more and more about from people, is the Labuan company. Now, for those of you who may not know about Malaysia, Labuan is a part of Malaysia on the Borneo side of the country. If you ever look at a map, you know that there are two parts of Malaysia that are not connected. They're separated by water. You've got peninsular Malaysia, which is connected to Thailand at the north, and to Singapore at the south. And then you've got, across the ocean, you've got this northern strip running along Borneo, which is also home to the tiny Sultanate of Brunei, and as well as most of the island of Borneo is composed of Indonesia. And Labuan is about as far east in Malaysia as you can get. It is a kind of its own autonomous area that benefits from being under the protection of Malaysia, that benefits from the dual tax treaties and all the different stuff that Malaysia has to offer, but it's allowed to do its own thing. It's not quite a Hong Kong situation. Hong Kong benefits from China's one country, two systems, where they're allowed to have their own economic policy, their own currency, their own all of that. It's similar, but in some ways different in Labuan. And Labuan is increasingly a place that people are talking about going and setting up their offshore company, because there are a lot of benefits to being in Malaysia. Now, the one thing that we've been talking more and more about lately is the fact that if you're going to set up an offshore corporation, I believe that there are fewer and fewer reasons to do so on some island rock somewhere. People talk about going to the Seychelles or the British Virgin Islands or wherever else. Especially if you're a Westerner, there's probably better opportunities than those. It's probably better to go to a Hong Kong, a Labuan, a Singapore, even a Panama. Potentially, if you want residency in Europe, even setting up a company in Europe and paying a little bit of tax. I believe that the days of incorporating on these island jurisdictions in the middle of nowhere, that is going to come to an end because I believe that Western governments are going to make it harder and harder and harder, and they're going to strip away the advantages that those jurisdictions have. Not to mention that you're going to be looked at sideways by not only any tax authority, but potentially by people that you want to do business with. I'm talking to a lot of high-end business guys lately who they don't want to go to Mauritius or Vanuatu or the Marshall Islands because they're going out there and they want to be taken seriously. And they want to get big business-to-business contracts. And they don't believe that another business is going to take them seriously when they have a Mauritius company with a Seychelles bank account. So you want to look at jurisdictions that are low tax or no tax, or at least offer the possibility of paying no tax if you set things up right. And Hong Kong is a perfect example of that, where as long as you're not really conducting business in Hong Kong and you're running your company in the same way as, let's say, a trading company, then you don't have to pay tax. Hong Kong it's long been used by guys who ship stuff from China to, let's say, Europe, and they want to use Hong Kong as an intermediary for their invoices, and they pay no tax to do that. So that's the kind of jurisdiction you want to look for, a place like Hong Kong that's legitimate, with legitimate banks, stable banks, all of that, and you're going to have to do a little bit of compliance to be in a jurisdiction like that, but it's well worth it, I believe, because going forward, you're going to have so many fewer headaches. So, to that point, Hong Kong is great, Singapore is good. Labuan is worth considering because Labuan is one of those very low-tax jurisdictions. And a lot of companies who, again, have legitimate business, such as AirAsia, the big low-cost carrier here based in Kuala Lumpur, they're in Labuan because they need a place that is compliant. And the deal in Labuan is pretty simple. You can pay 3% tax on your trading activities, or you can elect to pay around 20,000 Malaysian ringgit, which is a little under 6,000 US dollars a year. And you can make an election in each given tax year. So if you're starting out, you can pay 3% and you can make adjustments as you go along. Now, setting up shop in Labuan is subject to a lot of the same stuff you might see in Hong Kong. You're not going to get bearer shares, which really don't exist anywhere anymore in all practical purposes. You're going to have to disclose the beneficial owner. You're going to have a certain amount of authorized share capital. There is an ongoing, as with every jurisdiction, but there is a little bit higher ongoing annual fee that's about $800. And you're going to have to put some reports together and jump through a few hoops. But the taxes in Labuan are very, very low, and a lot of international banks have a presence in Labuan, and you can go and open accounts all day long there. Opening an account here in Kuala Lumpur or in Peninsular Malaysia in general is rather difficult unless you have that MM2H visa that we talked about last week, or unless you have a work visa, or unless you're here for some specific reason, not just as a tourist. But you set up a Labuan company, you can go out and churn out bank accounts left and right in Labuan, and they have banks, including some of the US banks that you may be familiar with. And so Labuan has become very, very friendly to people from all nationalities. You don't have to live any particular place. You don't have to be any particular nationality. By the way, Malaysia is perfectly open to Middle Eastern nationalities that some countries kind of shy a little bit away from. So it's a very good option for people who would otherwise consider Hong Kong, that they don't want to have a local director. They don't want to run the company as if they live there. Singapore, for example, they want you to run it as you live there, more so. Hong Kong and Labuan are good options. Now, if you can go to Hong Kong and pay no tax by actually not doing business there, then why would you go to Labuan? Well, there are certain people from certain nationalities who can benefit from Malaysia's tax treaties. Malaysia's got dozens and dozens and dozens of double tax treaties to where you can use the tax that you pay to offset tax that you might owe in your home country. And this is stuff that you probably want to talk to an accountant about. We're, of course, bringing a top U.S. accountant to Passport to Freedom in Cancun, but no matter where you live, you want to talk to an accountant and figure this out, because it is something that you have to plan properly for. But if you're a Western citizen and you're trying to be tax compliant in your home country, which of course you should, then Labuan is worth looking into. Check and see if your country has a double tax treaty. And believe me, I mean, you've got access in Labuan to probably 50 or 60 different banks from all around the world. You've got some of the Malaysian banks, you've got, like I said, the U.S. banks. All the banks, they all go and they all set up shop in Labuan. Now, with a Labuan company, you can, in all likelihood, get a bank account in Singapore, possibly in Brunei. You can get bank accounts throughout the region. And vice versa. So if you're doing business in Asia, then Labuan may be an alternative to look at to Hong Kong. And especially so because I would not want to have an MM2H visa or be resident in Malaysia and have a Labuan company. I still want international diversification. So if you want to live in Malaysia, then set up a company somewhere nearby. But Singapore, for instance, has made things much harder in recent years for people to take advantage of its system. I know there are a lot of guys out there who sing the praises of the Singapore company. It is a good company. Singapore is a great jurisdiction, but I'm not sold. You're not getting out of Singapore without paying tax 99% of the time. Yes, the tax is very low. Yes, if you're not making a ton of money and you set things up, you can probably pay in the single digits. But 8 or 9% versus 0% can still be a big difference on $500,000 or even $250,000. That's a lot of money. That's a nice rent payment in a pretty nice place in this part of the world. And so Singapore has taken away, in my opinion, one of the biggest advantages in that you can't just start any old Singapore company, hire one person, put a couple $1,000 or $25,000 or $50,000 in the bank, and get a Singapore Entrepass. The process for becoming an entrepreneur and actually getting residency in Singapore has been very, very, very difficult. On top of the fact that getting citizenship there has become more difficult, on top of the fact that you cannot have dual citizenship if you're a Singaporean. So Singapore is a great company, but it's not the best offshore company. It's a great jurisdiction, but not the best jurisdiction, especially for someone who does not want to live there. And to be honest, if I'm going to pay a little bit of tax, I might consider going to Europe. Believe it or not, I might consider going to Europe and paying 10% tax in Hungary or 5 to 15% in Lithuania and getting residency there and not really having to hire very many people, if any, in some cases, and not having to have much capital to my company's name. Europe has become far more easy to deal with than Singapore, and obviously I'm not a big fan of Europe and subjecting myself to EU regulations. Not at all. But you should be able to get something. If you're going to pay a little bit of tax, try and get something for your money. So Hong Kong and Labuan are great options for someone who does not want to move somewhere or get a residency. Definitely look into both, especially as Singapore, I believe, becomes less and less attractive. All right, we're going to come back and talk about second residency and second citizenship in, of all places, China. China's, I have a lot of admiration for the way business is done in China, and I believe that following the Chinese market's important. We're going to get into that a little bit too. But before we go, I need a quick favor from everyone who's listening to this show. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to jump through any hoops. But here's what I need you to do right now, because we're making some very big decisions about the direction we're going to go in 2015, and I need to know that you support me and support this radio show. I need you to send an email, just a simple email, to andrew@nomadcapitalist.com. andrew@nomadcapitalist.com. And type in whatever thoughts you have about the show. Let me know that you support the show and you want the show to keep going. I don't care if it's one sentence. I love the show. hey, Andrew, I hate the show. Stop doing the show. Andrew, you're an idiot. Whatever your comment is, good or bad, I want to hear from you this week because we're going to be announcing in Cancun some changes. Like any growing business, we have to be good capitalists and make sure our resources are properly allocated. And even though we get thousands and tens of thousands of downloads of this show, I need to know that you support me and that you stand by me doing this show because there are so many different places we can be putting our resources right now. And we're growing so quickly, and we can only hire so many people at a time. We can't keep up with everything. So if this show is not a valuable part of your life or of enough people's lives, then we may discontinue the show. Not because I don't like doing the show, but because there's just better places to put our resources. So Andrew at nomadcapitalist.com, send me an email and let me know that you support what we are doing on the show, or if you don't support it, and tell us that too. But if we don't get enough people, then we may have to make some difficult decisions for 2015. All right, nomadcapitalist.com is the website. Plus, coming up later, not just Chinese residency, but also what to do with your IRA, especially if you are a U.S. person. Stick around for that. Nomadcapitalist.com. Listen to this.
The Woodstock of Offshore. Join us for Passport to Freedom in Cancun, January 2015. Reserve your seat at passporttofreedomevent.com.
No, man.
Nomad Capitalist Report and PassportToFreedomEvent.com is your place for one of the last tickets to Passport to Freedom in Cancun. This may be the last event that we do for the public. Because we've got so many great members in our Nomad Society, so many great customers, so many great people who want really specific, intimate events. And this may be the last big one we do for the public. So if you're not in on this one, this may be your last chance. All right, second residency, second citizenships in Asia. We talked last week about Malaysia. And if you didn't hear that discussion on the MM2H visa, it is a very easy and straightforward way to get into living in Asia and living in a place that I believe is very friendly to Westerners. But further off the beaten path, we always talk about China. And the Chinese culture, Chinese business, Chinese influence on global investment all over the world. And so I wanted to bring on the expert on how to get residency in China. It's a very unconventional option, but one, of course, that having spent a lot of time in China, I've seen many foreigners there, and there's really only one way to do it, and that's the right way. There are no visa runs in China to speak of, but you can live there. And there's a very complicated process for Chinese citizenship. So Gary Chadarao runs the Chinese and U.S. immigration law website, lawandborder.com. He is probably the most visible guy when it comes to Chinese and U.S. immigration, back and forth. And I wanted to bring him on to discuss this. Gary, welcome to the Nomad Capitalist Report.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Let me start with this because, we get inquiries from people from all around the world. When you have, million-plus people come and you get all kinds of questions. And one question that we seem to get a lot from U.S. persons who are tired of being U.S. persons, they want to renounce their citizenship is, hey, I want to go to a country that hates the U.S. Where can I go? And you think, all right, there's China, there's Russia. Getting into China is a very difficult process. Are there any residency or citizenship options for foreigners to come to China and become Chinese?
Absolutely, there's residency options. We'll talk about citizenship too. Mainly residency options. And the key thing here, the reason why such options exist is that China and the U.S. don't hate each other. They have a competitive, sometimes a bitter relationship, but sometimes a cooperative relationship. And the opportunities to live here as a foreigner arise because of the multifaceted and intense economic relationships between China and the rest of the world. China, for several years now, has had as a matter of national policy the goal of bringing high-skilled professionals to China to assist with the reform and the opening up, the development of the economy.
Is that something, I mean, obviously governments go out and they say, hey, we want to do this, this, and the other. And then they go out and they do the opposite. Obviously, I mean, people have concerns about the Chinese government. Look, I've got concerns about all governments, but in practice, I mean, is the process easy? If I say, hey, I want to move to China, I can't just move to China and just say, hey, I'm just going to hang out just because I like living here. You got to do something. You have to start a company. You have to invest some money, right?
Here's where I would start. When President Obama was in China last month for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, APEC Summit, he and President Xi Jinping of China jointly announced a new deal for tourists and business visitors. The deal is that each country will issue 10-year visas to citizens of the other country. That doesn't mean that a U.S. citizen can come to China and live here for 10 years, but what it does mean is that the visa will be valid over a period of 10 years to allow business or tourist visits. Those visits will be for a maximum of 60 days at a time. Now, you can't come 60 days, leave for a day, come back 60 days, and live here. You just can visit and do business here temporarily with that visa. But this is a way for people who want to learn more about China to apply for the visa. It's straightforward, and come here and learn more about the country. If people are interested in moving to China, then for professionals with 2 years plus of post graduation experience, they may well be able to qualify for a work visa. Or if they would like to start their own company, they may be able to have the company hire them and work in China that way. Work visas are typically, but not always, valid for 1 year at a time.
So for our audience, they're entrepreneurs, they want to do something. Obviously, China is a lot more difficult of a market than even Hong Kong on the edge there, or a lot of other places, Singapore, the kind of places that we talk about. But if someone has their heart set on China, perhaps they see some of the opportunities and they're willing to take the challenge of doing business in a much different economy. I mean, is there a guideline for how much someone needs to invest to go and basically hire themselves with their own company in China?
There is no set guideline according to the laws. And the way that you know how much you're going to need to invest is going to be a matter of practical experience. China has opened up, for example, a free trade zone in Shanghai recently. And many businesses want to be in that free trade zone. And as a result, in order to be able to get a work visa, a significant investment is going to be required. Maybe $500,000 or so. It's going to depend on what the exact field, industry that the company is going to do work in. Generally, you can think of the tier one cities, the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou as being the most expensive to invest in for purposes of opening up a company and getting yourself a work visa. On the other hand, China's northeast and China's vast expanses of in the west have very little foreign investment, and so a lower foreign investment is going to make it possible to open up a company and sponsor yourself for a visa. We're talking about as low as $50,000 in certain markets.
This is not some European country where you can go and put 5 or 10 grand in the bank. You have to really invest. But what I have to ask you is, and I want to flip the equation in a moment, but what I want to ask is, China was the first place for me going back years ago where I went and I heard the stories and I saw with my own eyes and my friends showed me, hey, this guy opened a donut store, and it was the first donut store, and now he has 100 donut stores because the Chinese really like to eat these donuts. And it was just like anything is possible. And there's just so many opportunities. Is there a particular opportunity, whether it's in those Tier 1 cities or whether it's in the boonies, where someone who's a foreigner can come in and successfully have some chance at adapting and taking part in an opportunity?
I'm not going to be a big sales guy for China that says this is a place for everybody to be. China over the last couple of decades was growing at 10% a year. And when China started that process in the 80s, it was growing from nothing. In other words, an economy that had suffered greatly during the Cultural Revolution, and was able to grow very quickly because there was very little in place. Today, in 2014, 2015 almost, the first tier cities are very highly developed, and there's both domestic and foreign competition. It's very intense. You can't come in with any idea for a business and hope to hope to succeed. You have to do your research. You have to understand what the market wants and requires.
Is there something in particular that you think is underserved right now? Is there one thing that you say, hey, this is underserved?
The Chinese government has a list of encouraged industries. In other words, industries where they think that where additional investment from abroad is encouraged. And sure, there are plenty of those. An example would be anything where there's going to be some kind of high-tech transfer to China. China still wants to get foreign technology. Another one would be anything in the medical industry, because for example, private hospitals and clinics is an industry that's growing as people in China are becoming more wealthy and growing older. Things related to foreign exchange, the ability to go out, and education. So education consultants and schools, universities, training centers are growing here. There are other opportunities too, but those are just some of them.
Is it true? I mean, because it's funny how I talk to people all around the world, and everyone keeps mentioning, and I'm a big fan of this, and we talk about it, but everyone keeps mentioning medical tourism. I just talked to a guy the other day in Macedonia, in Europe, who's saying, yeah, we're making a push for medical tourism. And I thought, okay, you're not going to get the local people. You've got plenty of competition in Europe, and I think you have that in Asia for China, but in China it seems like you've got the added problem that is nationalistic in some ways as the Chinese are. It seems like they also look down on a lot of the things that come from China, one of them perhaps being medical care, that they would rather go to Singapore if they have money. They'd rather go to Thailand or Malaysia. I mean, do you think that some of those things that maybe the government wants it to happen, but the market just won't tolerate it?
You're not going to find people coming to China for typical medical tourism because the healthcare industry just is not developed enough here. And the ideas of customer care are behind. Hospitals are typically dirty and crowded and inconvenient, that don't have decent food. People who stay in the hospitals typically need to have family who will bring them food, care for them, wash them, etc. So you're not going to find that kind of medical tourism in China. I'd say if there's medical tourism here currently, then it's probably related to traditional medical care, and it's not something that I'm particularly familiar with.
Yeah. I do think there are a lot of opportunities, but one thing that I think perhaps that is much more readily available to our listeners is something that I have to be honest, it breaks my heart. The number of Chinese tourists to every Western country, of course, is rising because disposable incomes are through the roof. And the book I always recommend is The $10 Trillion Prize, which lays out the case for what the Chinese middle class is doing. But tourism from Chinese nationals to the U.S. in particular is rapidly rising, as is the value of properties that Chinese buyers are purchasing in the U.S., largely in California, places like that. What trends do you see in terms of immigration and non-immigration from Chinese to countries like the United States that perhaps a Western entrepreneur could capitalize on by selling products on the Western side?
Sure. Well, people going out from China could fall into several different categories. The one which they'll talk about on the news most commonly in China is corrupt officials who are going abroad or bringing their families abroad to escape prosecution and to hide their money. That's the most highly publicized section, but in fact, that's very few people. Most of the Chinese who are going abroad are going to fit into other profiles. First, just people going abroad for tourism. With such a large population and an elite that's growing in number and even a middle class, it's becoming more common to want to go abroad for a holiday.
For status purposes, really, right? I mean, that's kind of the stereotype about Chinese tourists is you go to Europe and they make fun of the Italians, they make fun of the French for waking up and smelling the coffee. They're on the go. They're in 3 cities a day. They're in 7 countries in 10 days. They're move, go, 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 go. And then they go back and say, look where we went.
Absolutely. Over recent years, commonly people went abroad in tour groups that had several stops and where people just wanted to say that they went to, all the leading cities in the U.S. in a short trip. But China is developing so quickly, and the tourism industry is developing so quickly that's changing too. Young people are going abroad. They don't want to go on a tour group. They have their own ideas for what they want to do. They want to go surfing in Los Angeles, or they want to go rock climbing in Colorado. So more individual and more varied tourism is beginning to happen. That's a recent trend. But besides tourists and corrupt officials, other groups of people that are going abroad are wealthy Chinese. There's every year there are surveys of what percentage of wealthy Chinese have already obtained green cards or citizenship abroad and what percentage would like to. And the percentage that would like to is always somewhere around 60%. And so people with wealth in China do perceive some risk here, especially they don't want to have all their eggs in one basket. They want to diversify their assets and their ability to choose where they want to live. And so many people with wealth will invest that abroad and want to immigrate abroad and get a green card, whether it's the U.S. or Canada or Australia or New Zealand. Those are just some of the options that they look at. And then another segment of society that's going abroad is businesses that are going abroad. Over the last couple of years, there have been some hearings in Congress about the Chinese tech firm Huawei going abroad, opening up, doing business in the U.S. Well, they're all over the world. And other leading Chinese companies also want to go abroad, whether it's in the energy sector or the transportation sector or other businesses are looking to grow to compete internationally.
What can we do if we, for example, we've got listeners who they have not become expats, they're still in the United States. I mean, is there a possibility for people to serve the Chinese market, whether it's in real estate investment, other investment. I know that you help people with immigration, such as the EB-5 visa that I just so wish these people wouldn't get. It really gnaws at me because I don't think they know what they're getting into with the worldwide taxation and all the draconian world of hurt that awaits them. But is there a way for people who are in, California, the other communist country in the world, to serve the Chinese market, or is it just like, you know what, we're Chinese, we want other Chinese. If you're, if you're not Chinese in descent, we don't want to do business with you.
Sure. I mean, it depends what you have to offer. Real estate agencies in California have done well selling real estate to Californians. Not necessarily all Chinese who own the real estate agencies. They need to be culturally sensitive. You're going to need some Chinese-speaking people on staff, and they're going to need to understand what are the cultural concerns of people who are buying real estate. Like what kind of house do Chinese people want? Do they want a swimming pool? Do they want a big living room? Right? How do they get proper feng shui for their house? Where do they want it to be near? A good school district for little kids or a university, etc. So whatever the industry is in the U.S., it's possible to tie into what Chinese people are interested in investing in the U.S. And I think, especially as Chinese individuals and companies become more sophisticated, they're going to be looking for the best quality and the best, most reasonable prices they can. So there are opportunities out there.
Just, really quickly, compare and contrast that, because again, if you read the $10 trillion prize, you see what Chinese people tend to want to spend more money on, where they want to be more status conscious, but they're also very deeply value oriented. What things, if you're doing business with Chinese or in the Chinese market, do you want to be flashier and sell at a premium, and what services would you say, hey, you need to be very value oriented?
I'm not sure that I'm able to answer that question. As a lawyer, I'm focused pretty narrowly on legal issues. But over the last several years, definitely the luxury brands have done well in China, and in particular, they've done well abroad selling to Chinese. So if you go in Paris into the particular malls where Chinese shoppers like to go, they want to buy their Louis Vuitton bags there, or their Hermes scarves there, even more than they want to buy them at the luxury brand stores in China. So I don't have a great answer for you in general, but people Chinese shoppers are discriminating, and they do look for some luxury items. In many of the car parks here in Beijing, they look like luxury car shopping malls. They're all the brands of Maserati and Ferrari, etc. Lamborghini. There has been one of the things which I think probably your listeners know is that the China economic growth is slowing, and economic growth is something like 7% this year, and some of the luxury brands have seen real downturns in their sales. This is linked partially to China's overall growth, and partially to President Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign, which has tried to get government officials to stop
buying Prada bags,
taking bribes,
blue,
not being seen in fancy restaurants, not being seen with expensive houses or cars in their names.
Hey, Gary Chatterow, lawandborder.com. If you're looking to move to China or start a business in China, he is the guy to go to in Beijing and in Shanghai. lawandborder.com. And Gary, I thank you for the insights on the Chinese immigration process and the opportunities there.
Andrew, a pleasure to speak with you.
Capitalist.com, and we'll continue. From Kuala Lumpur, the Nomad Capitalist Report, nomadcapitalist.com. So much information for free on that website. We got an email, and I don't have the time to get back to personal emails. I would love to be able to get back with more people. I do read the emails that come in. I would love to be able to go back and forth with more people, but we get so many emails, and it's hard for me to respond to everyone personally. And of course, as a capitalist, we have people who pay for consultations and pay for me to help them, so it's hard for me to help everyone personally. But occasionally we do get an email here that I think is of great use to everyone, and we share it on the show. And Damien writes in and asks, Andrew, I have money that I've been saving for over 12 years in my IRA. I don't have a lot of money just in cash. Can I invest in the things you talk about in my IRA? Peace, Damien. Well, I have talked before many times about not putting money in an IRA, not putting money in an RSP or any other kind of government retirement account, because it is the largest untapped pool of wealth for the government to come in and take. And whether the government just comes in and confiscates it, or whether they come in and force you to put it into government bonds or treasuries or something else, whether they put severe restrictions on your use of the money, there are all kinds of different ways that they can do it. So, just not having money in there in the first place is the best idea. One of the things in the United States that people have talked about as a good thing with IRAs is the concept in more recent years that you can actually invest in physical gold, provided that it is stored in an approved vault. And the problem with these things, the problem when the government comes out and says, hey, we're going to make it easier for you to use your IRA, for instance, because now we're going to let you buy gold. Well, all the people in the gold community went out and talked about how phenomenal that was and how freeing and liberating it was that you can go out and you can own physical gold. You don't have to keep your money in a checking account or in a mutual fund. But the government still holds the strings. First of all, it's funny to me that the people who don't want to store their gold in a vault in Singapore, by the virtue of if you don't hold it, you don't own it, those people are happy to take their money from their IRA and put it into physical gold that is stored in a vault in the United States by not just any vault, but by an approved vault that the government has put their stamp on and that the government also knows where to find it. So, to me, having money in an IRA is just bad. No matter how many things the government tries to do to make you feel like you're free and you can do what you want with your money, it's just not true, in my opinion. Now, again, this is why I'm saying, listen, if you want to buy gold and you want to store it, you go to nomadgold.com. That's our partner in Singapore. You store the gold, you buy it, it's easy. So if you want to buy gold, that's what you do. But if you already have money in an IRA and you just want to do all kinds of whatever with it, you want to buy real estate in Cambodia, you want to buy Shetland ponies and have them run around in Morocco, you want to buy agricultural land, you want to do all kinds of stuff. It is possible, but you have to set up an offshore IRA or offshore IRA LLC. We're going to be talking about this, and we're actually going to have a guy on site helping people set these up in Cancun. But, the process is pretty straightforward. It costs you a couple $1,000, and you can go about moving your IRA funds offshore. And once you do that, you've got a lot more flexibility because the money is offshore. Now, that is the program in the United States. There are fewer options for people, for example, in the UK. Because I've talked to people about this in the UK, and the options just aren't good. So there may be a time that if you can't put your money into an offshore IRA LLC, there may be a time when you say, all right, how much money do I have in this thing? Is it worth just taking out and paying the penalty? If you're young and you don't have a lot of money that you've put in an IRA, now I'm not a tax advisor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, I'm not any of those things. I'm just a guy on the radio. But if you're young and there's not a lot of money, and if you're not making a lot of money to where your tax bracket isn't that high, there may be times, and you should consult with your professional before acting on this, but there may be times when you just say, I'm going to take the hit. I'll pay the penalty, I'll pay the tax, I'll take the money out, because it's going to be taxed at some point anyway, and I'll put it somewhere in an offshore bank account, what have you. Now, of course, if you are a U.S. person, the offshore IRA LLC is probably a good way to go if you have any kind of assets in your IRA, specifically because if you take that money, if you live in the United States and you take your IRA money out, and then you just go and start investing it in cool stuff all around the world, you will still be subject to capital gains tax because you're a U.S. resident, even because you're a U.S. citizen. Now, if you're from another country, if you're a citizen of the UK or somewhere like that, you can always move and not have to pay tax on gains that you incur while you're not a resident in that country. But if you're a U.S. person, you're going to get stuck with a bill no matter where you invest. So if you can keep the money in the offshore IRA LLC, then that'll be probably, not for everyone, but probably a good general piece of advice. But as Dr. Laura once said, some things cannot be fixed. Some things, you go down the wrong road and it's hard or even impossible to fix. So the best advice is to make sure that you're doing the right thing now. You're putting your money where you want it now. You're not subjecting it to government retirement plans now. And if you've just got a little bit of money in the IRA, maybe you just right the ship going forward and just let that, let sleeping dogs lie with what you have now. If you have more money and you need that money to access, as in the case of Damien, where you don't have a lot of cash but you have a lot of IRA money to invest, then the offshore IRA LLC may be the way to go. And you can find people in Google. Some of them are very, very overpriced. It's not that tricky. You should not be spending $10,000 to set up an offshore IRA setup. You just shouldn't. So make sure you find the right person, and that's of course what we do here for our members, for our attendees, for everything else. All right, nomadcapitalist.com is the website for all the free stuff. We're counting down the passport to freedom in Cancun. So many of you are have emailed me and said you're excited to be there, you're excited to see this guy or that guy, Jim Rickards or Joel Nagel or whomever. And this week, I need to hear your feedback on the show. Send me an email, andrew@nomadcapitalist.com, even if it's just a line. Even if it's just 4 words. Hey, I love the show. I hate the show. I need to hear from you. We need your feedback. So we've got a lot of big decisions coming up between now and the time that we convene in Cancun. Andrew@nomadcapitalist.com. We will see you next week.